Welcome back, Netrunner fans, to part 2 of my Escalation review. In this part, we're going to be looking at all the Corp cards. The first card is a new piece of ice for HB. This is Fairchild 3.0. It's 6 to res, it's 3 influence, it's a 5 strength Code Gate Bioroid AP. The runner can spend triple click to break up to 3 subroutines on Fairchild 3.0. It has 3 subs. The first 2 are the runner must pay 3 credits or trash one of his or her installed cards. And the final subroutine is do 1 brain damage or end the run. Blazing quite a few new trails with this card. First of all, this is the first 3.0 Bioroid we've ever seen. And this seems extremely logical. We already have 1 and 2.0s. I think we all knew this was going to come at some point. The other thing I wanted to point out is that the last sub with the doing the brain damage or ending the run, there's actually surprisingly few ice where the Corp gets to decide which of 2 things occur. And I think that's just generally a very logical way to do subroutines and give them a little bit more flexibility. Like with the 2.0 Bioroids, the 3.0 is just going to make it even harder for the runner, even less granular for the runner to be able to break these subroutines. Pretty much the only case where they're going to be able to click through this thing is if they run first click, or if they have some sort of mechanism that gives them additional clicks. And the fact that this does have the ability to end the run is going to make it less porous than even just the other 2 Fairchilds, but also a lot of other Bioroid ice. You can just stop them with this if you need to. Like we've seen with the other Fairchilds, these credit or trash installed card subs are really taxing and are really difficult to deal with. And like I pointed out with those, there are a few runner decks that are going to have superfluous cards where it's maybe not as hard for them to trash stuff, but most runner decks, they're not going to be able to just trash random stuff. They're going to probably rather pay the credits or break the ice. And this as a 5 strength Code Gate for only 6 to res, 3 subs, that's pretty solid. And I think just all around we've seen better and better Bioroid designs with a lot of these more recent printings. The next card is a new operation for HB. This is Ark Lockdown. It's 1 to play, it's 2 influence. Name a card. Remove all copies of that card in the heap from the game. Here's a card that I think has been a long time coming. If you've ever heard me talk about Levy AR Lab Access, my main complaint with that card is that it just is too good as a recursion mechanism. It resets your deck, and I think it distorts the metagame in some ways that maybe aren't super obvious. This is a card that has some pretty obvious utility against Levy AR. You're going to be able to just target, remove, deal with it. But also now that we're seeing these icebreakers that install from the heap, especially Paperclip, this type of card looks a little more reasonable against a wider range of decks. When you throw in there that decks like Max are going to just have a whole buffet of options with something like this, I think this is a card that makes quite a bit of sense and is probably going to see play in a few decks. I'd really like to see incremental damage decks be part of the metagame. In my eyes, Flatline has been kind of problematic because it's all just been about this like alpha strike sort of thing, and we've never really seen PE or like Argus, that style of slow, small amounts of damage throughout the course of the game, running the runner out of cards. That's really never been all that viable, and I think Levy AR is largely the reason for that. This card might give those kind of decks a little more play against Levy AR, and it's also going to be reasonably decent just because of how powerful runner recursion is just in general. With clone chips, deja vus, and stuff like that, this is just going to be a card that is going to have some reasonable amounts of utility against most decks, so it's not going to be just a totally useless dead card if you just happen to draw it against the wrong matchup. In a perfect world, I'd like to see stuff like Clone Chip, Levy AR, that type of thing, just be more balanced and not quite as overpowered. But this is a pretty decent band-aid for that problem, and I think that this is going to be a positive addition to the game, just because it's going to address some of the problematic cards on the runner side. Next up, we have another operation for HB. This is Heligan Beta Test. It's 1 to play, it's 3 influence, it's Black Ops. Play only if the runner trashed an accessed Corp card during his or her last turn. Trace 2. If successful, trash 2 installed non-program cards. If unsuccessful, take 1 bad publicity. My first remark about this card is that it is infinitely better than the legendarily bad Heligan Alpha Test. I think Heligan Alpha Test is probably one of the worst cards printed. It's just a really low trace value and it does very, very little. This card, on the other hand, you can't get programs with it, but it's giving you a wider range of options other than just resources, and you're going to get to trash 2 of them if it pays off. Now, the problem with this is the problem that was also there with Alpha Test, which is that it's a really low trace, so it's pretty much only going to work if you have a credit advantage over the runner. You're going to have a pretty substantial advantage, and given how popular it is to run Link lately, we've seen a lot of these security nexus decks that run like rabbit holes, stuff like that, to just boost their links so they can maximally abuse security nexus. This card really doesn't look that great in a metagame where people are actually playing Link. I think this is probably too weak for most decks to run, but it is nice to have more ways to destroy runner cards in the card pool, and I think maybe in the right metagame this card could see 1 or 2 copies in a deck. Next up, we have a new agenda for Jinteki. This is Project Kusanagi. It's a 2 for 0, and it's a security subtype. When you score Project Kusanagi, place 1 agenda counter on it for each advancement token on it over 2. Hosted agenda counter, choose 1 piece of ice to gain subroutine do 1 net damage after all of its other subroutines for the remainder of this run. If you've watched my reviews before, you know I'm a sucker for Jinteki PE, and this is a card that is pretty much tailor-made for that ID. I really don't anticipate anybody trying this outside of PE, and I think even with PE, it's going to require some finagling to get to work. Now, the biggest thing about this is that it's a 2 for 0, so you're going to be able to score it to zap them with the PE ID, but more importantly, if they steal it, they're going to get zapped and they're not going to get any points for that. It's worth pointing out that this will count for an agenda for Philotic Entanglement. I think basically every PE deck plays that, and this is just going to make that even deadlier if they've managed to steal 1 or 2 of these. Now, also, this card has the ability to add these net damage subroutines. And I think within PE that's actually really useful, because the tendency with PE is to play a lot of really cheap ice that just make it more dangerous to survive a run. So an easy example is Lockdown. This is a card where you're hoping that they'll run into it and then they'll hit like a snare or some nasty thing on their access. And this is going to be a way that you can get even more utility out of like a Lockdown, maybe a Crick, maybe even like a pop-up window. All of these sorts of ice, which are really common in PE, are going to be much, much better if you have the ability to add a little poke damage to it. Another card in PE that this interacts well with is Mushin Notion. You're going to be able to put this down as a Mushin target, and it's going to be virtually no risk. If they run it, they're going to get 0 points and they're going to get poked. But if they don't run it, you're going to potentially be able to score it out with quite a few counters on it, and that's going to give you more ammo to put against your ice, especially the ones I was talking about earlier. It's also nice in PE to just be able to score this to zap them. I think there's definitely situations where that's going to be worth doing. Another thing I thought of is Voter Intimidation. That's a card I've messed around with a fair amount in PE, and this is going to be an easy enabler for it where you don't actually have to deal with the fact that they stole an agenda, because the agenda they stole is worth 0 points. Like I said at the beginning, I really don't see this seeing play outside of PE. 2 for 0s I think are difficult to include in decks because they basically force you to play agendas in place of cards that wouldn't be agendas normally, right? Like, since this is 0, it's not going to contribute to your required 20 points. So you're going to have to replace cards that wouldn't be agendas with agendas. And unless you have an ID that really capitalizes on that, like with PE, it's not going to be worth it, I think, for most decks. Next up is a new piece of ice for Jinteki. This is DNA Tracker. It's 8 to res, 3 influence. It's a 6 strength code gate AP. It has 3 subroutines that are all the same. Do 1 net damage. The runner loses 2 credits. Holy cow, this thing is brutal. There have been a lot of decent code gates in the history of the game, but when it comes to high-end, really difficult to deal with code gates, there's really just been like Toll Booth and maybe a handful of kind of lesser code gates. In this pack alone, we've seen 2 really strong high-end code gates, Fairchild and now this. And this, I think, is really significant, much better than Fairchild, and I think is definitely going to see play right out of the pack. The big thing is, if you face check this, it's going to really suck. And we are talking about an 8 to res piece of ice, so, face checking an 8 to res ice doesn't happen all the time, but if you do, you're going to take 3 net damage and lose potentially 6 credits. That's brutal. And when you consider also that even after you have a breaker and you run into this, it's going to be really taxing as a 6 strength code gate with 3 subroutines. That's definitely worth the 8. I'd say the biggest disadvantage of this is that it doesn't end the run. So if you're using this to protect like a scoring remote or something like that, I think it's going to be reasonable that the runner could just eat all of this negative effect and get through if they had to. But outside of that context, like if you're putting this on a central or something like that, this is one of the most taxing pieces of ice we've seen for a long time, and the fact that it's got this anti-face check aspect as well is really, really good. I anticipate this seeing play right out of the pack. It's probably going to be in like an RP or Glacier style of Jinteki. That 3 influence, I think, is going to make it harder to play outside of Jinteki, because it's always going to be up against Toll Booth, which is only 2 influence. I think this is an absolutely perfect piece of ice to have as your outermost piece of ice on a central server if you're playing a RP deck. Next up, we have a new Jinteki ID. This is Jinteki, Potential Unleashed. It's a 45-12, and it's a Mega Corp. Whenever the runner takes at least 1 net damage, trash the top card of this stack. Here's a new ID that fits almost exactly into what I was describing earlier, which is this incremental run the runner out of cards type of deck. And this, I think, is going to be a serious contender for PE for that style, though I think that those 2 decks are going to have some very, very important differences. With PE, you're always in better shape to try to play more agendas, because you're going to get more out of the ID if there's more agendas being scored or stolen. If that happens more often in the game, you're going to get more out of the ID. Whereas with this, you could play more of a standard package of agendas, not have to play a whole bunch. And as long as you have quite a few ways to do net damage, you're going to get a good value out of the ID. It's absolutely essential to point out that this works for each instance of damage, right? It's not just the first time. So if you have, for example, a piece of ice that has a bunch of subroutines that do 1 net damage, say Kamainu, something like that, this is going to be brutal with that. It's going to mill them a bunch of cards and they're going to take the damage. It's also very good with lots of perennial favorites in PE, stuff like Shock, Hokusai Grid. Things like that are going to be really mean with this. I could even see playing House of Knives, that being even more viable in this deck versus in PE, because that extra little mill effect is going to be really, really strong. Now again, like I was saying with PE, you're going to need a solution to Levy AR lab access. And I think PE is generally going to do Chronos Project as the solution to that. I don't really think Chronos Project's that great with this ID because it's going to require playing 3-for-1s and you're not going to get that extra utility out of the zap effect. You'd much rather play like Future Perfects, Fetal AIs, and maybe Global Foods to fill out your agenda points. rather than having to play a bunch of 3-for-1s that are just going to clog up your deck. So I think maybe Ark Lockdown that we looked at earlier might be a good use of some of your precious 12 influence, because it's going to give you, first of all, you're going to have more options because you're milling cards, so you might be able to just deal with their Icebreaker or something like that. That's brutal. But it's also going to be a nice card to give you a solution to Levy AR. This is an interesting ID. I think I still prefer PE in a lot of contexts, but I definitely think this is going to be worth messing around with, and I think it could be one of the cards that helps push this sort of mill, incremental flatline sort of strategy more into viability. Next up is a new asset for NBN. This is Alexa Bielski. She's 1 to res, 5 to trash. She's 2 influence. She's unique and she's a character. She has trash. Shuffle all cards in HQ into R&D. The runner may pay any number of credits to prevent one random card in HQ from being shuffled into R&D for every 2 credits spent. Here's another card that's looking forward to a post-Jackson Howard metagame. This is going to be a way to potentially prevent agenda flood in the early game. Jackson Howard is way better at that than this is. And I think generally my reaction to a lot of these kind of Jackson replacement cards has been, why are they so weak? Why does this one, first of all, why does it have to shuffle all of HQ? Couldn't it just shuffle targeted cards? Would that really be a problem? And second of all, the runner can prevent it with just credits? That seems to me like it's going to be a problem at certain stages of the game. I really like the idea of there being multiple cards to replace Jackson Howard, and it's obvious to me that Jackson is a little too strong, but I think relatively speaking, these cards are just not good enough as replacements, and it's kind of hard to say once Jackson rotates if something like this is going to see play, but really, I just don't think this is good enough for you to be willing to include it, enough copies of it, where you're going to draw it early enough, prevent the agenda flood early in the game, and later in the game, the runner having the ability to prevent the shuffles is kind of lame. Also, like with Jackson, Rumor Mill shuts this off. Next up, we have a new operation for NBN. This is Observe and Destroy. It's 0 to play, it's 1 influence, it's Gray Ops. Play only if the runner has fewer than 6 credits. As an additional cost to play this operation, remove 1 tag. Trash 1 installed card. Wow, this seems like a powerful option for a lot of decks that we've been seeing recently. Any deck that can get the runner tagged for an ongoing basis is going to really like this. And I think in general, this is probably the best targeted removal card that we've seen on the Corp side. I think this is definitely going to see a little bit of play. I like the idea that the runner can play around it by just being rich, and it's not like some of the other cards where them being rich means they're going to have to blow all their credits to beat it, something like mid-season replacements. This, on the other hand, all they have to have is have the money, and they're not going to have to spend it to prevent it. That's pretty cool. This is a pretty logical card, and this is the type of thing I'd like to see as a more control style out of NBN. Unfortunately, I think this card is pretty much only going to see play as a way to ensure that your flatline kill goes through, and we'll be talking about that more later in this review. Next up, we have a new operation current for NBN. This is Service Outage. It's 1 to play, it's 1 influence. It's a current, which means it's not trashed until another current is played or an agenda is stolen by the runner. As an additional cost to make the first run on his or her turn, even through a card ability, the runner must spend 1 credit. This is certainly not blowing me away. We already have a bunch of cheap, decent currents within NBN, so if you're just looking for a way to deal with Rumor Mill or another runner current, there's already some good ways to do that, and I think targeted marketing is generally just going to be a better option. This, to me, it just seems like it's not really powerful enough to include outside of that context. The biggest thing about this is it only works on the first run, So at most, it's going to tax them 1 per turn. And that just, to me, it just doesn't seem like it's going to be worth including a card in your deck to do that. Especially when you already have like Manhunt, targeted marketing, and then obviously out of faction currents as well. I'm just not impressed. Next up, we have the card that I think is easily causing the most stir out of this pack, and this is Boom. It's a new operation for Wayland. It's 4 to play, it's 1 to trash, and it's 3 influence. It's a double and it's Black Ops. Play only if the runner has at least 2 tags. As an additional cost to play this, spend a click, that's the double part. Do 7 meat damage. I thought we had learned the lesson with Traffic Accident that if you put play only if the runner has at least 2 tags on a card, all we're going to do is abuse it with breaking news. Unfortunately, I think that's the future of this card, is NBN decks that look largely like the NBN flatline decks of the past, that are basically just using different combinations of breaking news, copying breaking news with 24/7 news cycle, land the tags, and then boom them. And when you add in that consulting visit is a really excellent way to like tutor up and play the boom, and the fact that you can do that for no influence by just including enough Wayland cards in your NBN deck, I think realistically this is going to be a card that's going to primarily see play in NBN. Without breaking news, it's actually kind of hard to get the 2 tag thing to work in Wayland. You can play hard-hitting news and other out-of-faction things from NBN, but NBN's obviously going to be able to do that better, and they're going to have breaking news, which is just easily hands down the best way to tag the runner, period, and always has been. This card, I think, is really good in the power shutdown combo as well, because you're not going to have to iterate the combo, go through 3 different Jackson cycles. You're going to potentially be able to just hit him with 24/7 and boom, and that's going to be enough to flatline the runner. And pretty much all you have to do is have the breaking news already scored in your scoring area. I do really like the 1 trash cost on this card. I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you're doing the power shutdown thing I was talking about, it's going to be irrelevant if they trash this, since the whole idea of the combo is to put your entire deck into archives. I also wanted to point out the role of this card in any deck that's based on Mumbad City Hall. Not only is Mumbad City Hall a good way to meet the alliance requirement for consulting visit, but if you're playing it in a Wayland deck, you could pretty easily just constantly spam booms over and over, assuming you have some way to get the runner tagged. And since you're playing Consulting Visit, which is itself tutorable by Mumbad City Hall, it's going to be pretty easy to play, like a hard-hitting news or a mid-season, just to make sure that you can land those tags, and then you'll be able to just fire booms until they either get away from tags or somehow deal with all your booms and your Museum of Histories. Maybe if we see some sort of tagging effect that works in exclusively Wayland, Wayland could again regain its position as primary flatline. I certainly think it's viable to build Wayland decks with boom, but since breaking news is just by far the easiest way to land 2 tags, not just 1, 2 tags, I think this card is unfortunately going to just be another NBN card that just costs influence, and Wayland is not going to be able to do it as well as NBN can. Next up, we have a new current for Wayland. This is Door to Door. It's 3 to play, it's 2 influence, it's a current, and it's Black Ops. This card is not trash until another current is played or an agenda is stolen by the runner. That's the current part. When the runner's turn begins, trace 1. If successful, do 1 meat damage if the runner is tagged, otherwise give the runner 1 tag. The way I look at it, this card is pretty much always going to do the latter effect. I think, like I was just talking about, it's very difficult to tag the runner with Wayland, and this card is going to potentially read, at the beginning of each of their turns, trace them and give them a tag. Now, the problem is, the trace is trace 1, so you're going to have to be playing this in a deck that has a credit advantage over the runner. That's definitely doable, especially in Wayland. Blue Sun, for example, and several other Wayland decks have been really good at having tons and tons of economy. That's probably the one thing that Wayland really has that has worked out well for them. Now, like I was talking about earlier, we've seen a big period of Link in a way that we haven't pretty much in any other hit period in the history of the game. And I think that really hurts a card like this. And when you add in that I think there's already better currents, if you're just looking for a way to deal with runner currents, I think paywall implementation is probably better than this. I don't know. I'm kind of decidedly meh on this. I think it maybe could see a little bit of play, but I think the Trace 1 is really going to keep it back, and I'm just not that impressed with this. The last card in the pack is a neutral current called Scarcity of Resources. It's 1 to play, it's a current, and that means it's not trashed until another current is played or an agenda is stolen by the runner. The install cost of each resource is increased by 2. This card has some obvious utility against big resource decks, especially like the DLR decks that play a whole ton of resources and are going to just be installing them pretty much as soon as they get them. This has some obvious utility against that kind of strategy. The other thing I'd point out is that we're in a period where there are a lot of really, really powerful runner currents. Employee Strike and Rumor Mill are definitely the two that immediately come to mind. So you really want to have some sort of solution to those as the Corp player. And having a no influence, neutral solution that can have a big impact on the game, I think is pretty good just for the health of the card pool. So while I find this kind of situational and I'm not totally sure what I immediately would want to use this in, the fact that it has a nice taxing effect and deals with runner currents, I think is going to make it something that you're going to consider in a handful of decks. That's going to do it for my Escalation review. The main thing I have to say about this pack is something I also felt about Blood Money, which is that there are a lot of viable, strong, playable cards in this pack. And I think that's a trend that we've been seeing. More and more of the cards, a higher percentage of the cards released, are viable and are strong and fit into obvious archetypes. And that's definitely true with this pack on both sides. I'm really impressed with that. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, be sure to subscribe and give me a thumbs up. And let me know in the comments whether or not you like Boom and are ready to get blown up by it in games near you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for more Netrunner stuff.